It was meant to be a celebration of achievement and unity, a grand dinner with friends gathered under warm lights, laughter weaving through the air as toasts were raised. But in an instant, the illusion shattered. In front of everyone, Robert, the man admired for his success, swung his foot with quiet brutality and kicked his pregnant wife, Anna, to the floor. Silence slammed into the room harder than the impact. She lay there, stunned, the life growing inside her trembling against betrayal and pain. The guests froze, their cheers extinguished by shock. In that moment, a dangerous undercurrent was revealed within their perfect facade. Anna would not stay silent. Her broken body held a resolve forged in pain and injustice. That evening did not end the story. It began her transformation and set into motion a revenge that would dismantle everything he thought was untouchable. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Robert Dalton was the man many in his city aspired to be. He was polished, commanding, and admired for building a life that seemed untouchable. The magazines called him self-made, a visionary who could see opportunity where others saw obstacles. He lived in a mansion at the edge of town, owned fleets of luxury cars, and entertained guests with the kind of charm that convinced everyone he had nothing to hide. At his side was Anna, the woman who had walked with him from the very beginning, who sacrificed her own ambitions to see his flourish. They were photographed smiling at charity events, whispered about at exclusive gatherings, and described as the perfect couple. But beneath the gloss, a storm had always been waiting. The night he kicked her to the ground in front of his closest friends was not just violence. It was revelation. It forced a question everyone began asking: who exactly was Robert Dalton? Why would a man who had everything to lose, a man standing at the highest peak of wealth and influence, throw it away in a single night of cruelty? Was this the sudden eruption of hidden rage? Or was it a mask slipping to reveal the truth of his nature? Those who thought they knew Robert were confronted with a puzzle. Could the man who charmed investors, who commanded boardrooms with ease, also be the same man who regarded his pregnant wife not as a partner, but as an obstacle, even an enemy? And more pressing still, how would Anna, humiliated, dismissed, and left in silence, respond to the betrayal? The city was left in shock. The newspapers reduced him to headlines, but the deeper questions could not be answered by onlookers. Only Anna knew the truth of what that night meant, and only she would determine how the story would end. And so we are left with questions that stretch beyond a single violent act. Who was Robert Dalton beneath the surface of wealth and admiration? Why did he unleash such cruelty on the woman who trusted him most? And what path would Anna choose in the face of betrayal so public and so devastating? She could have disappeared quietly into the shadows, yet those who understood her knew she possessed a resilience few had seen. The whispers began. What would Anna do next, and how far was she willing to go to restore her dignity and her life? The answer would not only destroy the man who hurt her, it would expose the fragile foundations on which his entire empire rested. Robert Dalton's rise was the kind of story the American public loves to tell itself. He had grown up in a modest neighborhood, the son of a man who worked double shifts and a mother who stitched clothes for neighbors to keep food on the table. Those early struggles, he often said at charity galas, had shaped his ambition. By his mid-30s, he had broken into real estate, transforming neglected lots into profitable ventures, then using that momentum to build skyscrapers that bore his name. Robert was not simply a businessman, he was a brand. Politicians shook his hand in front of cameras. Newspapers printed his speeches about opportunity, and local television stations showcased his generosity whenever he donated to community programs. To the world, he was the embodiment of self-made success, and he wore that reputation like a crown. Behind every photograph of him cutting ribbons stood Anna, graceful, supportive, and always smiling. But Anna was more than a beautiful fixture at Robert's side. Before their marriage, she had been a promising architect with a keen eye for design, someone who could look at a flat sketch and immediately imagine how it would rise into a living space. When Robert was still hustling for his first projects, It was Anna who reviewed his plans, made suggestions, and connected him with people she had met during her studies. Her touch could be seen in the sweeping lines of his earliest developments, though no newspaper ever credited her for it. When Robert's career began to accelerate, Anna set her own ambitions aside, convinced that supporting his climb was also a victory for them both. Friends remembered how she arrived early at every event, made sure the tables were arranged to his liking, and stood just close enough to remind him that he was never alone. Yet while Robert enjoyed the spotlight, Anna quietly disappeared into the shadows. The contrast between their worlds was stark. In public, Robert was dazzling, expensive suits tailored to perfection, polished speeches that drew standing ovations, and a charisma that made even his rivals admire him. He seemed to float above ordinary concerns, a man untouchable by the frustrations of everyday life. Behind closed doors, however, the mask often slipped. Anna had witnessed his temper over minor inconveniences, the sharp words he reserved for her when he believed no one else could hear, the way he dismissed her contributions as if they were unworthy of acknowledgement. To outsiders he was disciplined, charming, and generous. To Anna he was increasingly controlling, a man who measured respect not by love but by obedience. It was a tension she endured silently, believing perhaps that his temper would fade, or that her patience would hold their marriage together. But silence can only stretch so far before it breaks. Still, there were moments that suggested another side of Robert, fleeting glimpses that complicated the portrait. He could surprise Anna with gestures of affection, whisk her away for weekend trips, or boast about her beauty to colleagues at banquets. Those contradictions confused those who knew them well. Was Robert the doting husband who brought flowers home unexpectedly, or the cold critic who reduced his wife to tears behind locked doors? Anna herself wrestled with that question late at night, lying awake as he slept beside her, wondering if the man she had married was the same man who now seemed so distant. Friends and family never guessed the depth of her doubts, because Anna mastered the art of appearing composed. Her smile became her armor, her silence her shield. And so the world continued to believe in the fairy tale of Robert and Anna Dalton, even as the foundation beneath it began to tremble. For Robert, every new achievement only reinforced his belief that he was invincible. He grew wealthier, more admired, and in many ways, more feared. Investors depended on him, city leaders sought his approval, and his name became synonymous with progress. With each success, however, his arrogance deepened. He began to view Anna less as a partner and more as an extension of his image, someone who existed to complete the portrait of perfection he presented to the world. The woman who had once been his equal in vision and intellect was gradually reduced in his mind to a silent shadow. Anna felt the change acutely, but she bore it with grace, choosing loyalty over confrontation, commitment over self-assertion. She believed that endurance was her duty, that love required sacrifice. But she could not know that the very qualities that made her invisible to Robert were also the ones that would one day empower her to bring him down. And so their story appeared unshakable, a golden couple admired by many, envied by more. Photographs of their smiling faces adorned the pages of magazines, their names appeared on guest lists of the most exclusive events, and their home became the symbol of achievement in their city. Yet within the walls of that same home, Anna carried a secret burden, the quiet knowledge that the man she loved was also the man who could wound her with words sharper than any blade. She tried to convince herself that his temper was temporary, that success had simply hardened him, and that time would restore what they had lost. But the truth was already taking shape, hidden in the cracks no camera could capture. And those cracks were already forming in the foundation of their marriage, cracks that would one day collapse under the weight of one violent night. The evening of the party had been arranged with precision. Robert Dalton spared no expense. Rows of crystal glasses caught the glow of chandeliers, laughter mingled with the notes of a string quartet, and his closest friends gathered in admiration of the man who seemed to have conquered everything. Anna, radiant despite the quiet weight of her pregnancy, moved carefully among the guests, exchanging pleasantries, ensuring every detail reflected her husband's image of perfection. She had done this countless times before, stepping into the background so Robert could stand taller. Yet as the night unfolded, a tension hovered between them, unseen by the crowd, but unmistakable to her. A misplaced remark, an innocent correction spoken softly at the table, was all it took for Robert's composure to fracture. What followed would not only silence the room but forever change the trajectory of both their lives. Robert's eyes flashed with the coldness Anna had come to recognize in private moments, but this time he did not wait until the doors were closed. The guests saw it plainly. The narrowing glare, the hand gripping the table edge, the sudden hush that fell as his voice cut through the laughter. Words sharp and humiliating struck first, the kind that stripped dignity away in seconds. Anna tried to steady herself, tried to meet his rage with calm, but she was no longer in the safety of shadows. She was exposed, cornered in front of the very people who once called her graceful. And then, in a move so brazen it seemed unthinkable, Robert lashed out with a swift kick, sending Anna reeling to the floor, her hands instinctively protecting the child she carried. The room gasped as one, glasses trembled in hands, and the music faltered into silence. Time seemed suspended. Anna lay on the polished floor, her breath caught between shock and pain, her eyes searching the faces around her. The men and women who had toasted Robert only moments earlier now stood frozen, unwilling to intervene, uncertain of what to believe. For Robert, the mask had fully slipped. He did not extend a hand, did not offer apology. He simply stood, chest heaving, as if daring anyone to challenge his authority. The empire he had built was reflected in that posture, in the belief that power meant impunity. Yet even as he stared down at Anna, something irreversible had occurred. The illusion was broken. The whispers would begin the moment the doors opened, and the perfect image he had spent years crafting was collapsing before his very eyes. For Anna, the fall to the ground was not just physical. It was a fall into clarity. In the shock of betrayal, in the ache of her body, a realization took root that could never be undone. She had lived for years in silence, bearing the weight of Robert's private cruelty, convincing herself that patience was strength. But this act, so public, so merciless, had severed the last thread of loyalty binding her to him. The betrayal was no longer hers alone to carry. It was etched in the memories of every guest present. As she pulled herself up slowly, gripping the edge of a chair, she understood something Robert had not yet grasped. In that moment of violence, he had not destroyed her. He had destroyed himself. The guests remained unsettled, murmurs low and uncertain, but none dared to confront Robert. The night sputtered into an awkward end, people filing out under the weight of what they had witnessed, each carrying the story that would spread like fire through the city. Robert retreated into silence, his pride forbidding even a gesture of remorse. Anna, however, withdrew to a quiet place within herself, carrying not just the pain of the night but the spark of something more powerful. Betrayal, humiliation, and violence had marked her, yes, but they had also awakened a resolve that would grow with every passing day. That dinner party would be remembered as the moment Robert's empire began to crumble, though he did not yet realize it. And then, as the lights dimmed on that disastrous evening, the truth became clear. This was not the end of Anna's story. It was only the beginning of Robert Dalton's downfall. The morning after the party, whispers had already begun to circulate through the city. Guests who had once pledged loyalty to Robert Dalton could not keep silent about what they had seen. Some softened the details, claiming it had only been an argument, while others recounted the moment with chilling accuracy. The sight of a pregnant woman struck down by the man who had vowed to protect her. By afternoon, the first rumors reached the press. Within days, headlines appeared. Business mogul's outburst stuns dinner guests. Questions surround Robert Dalton's marriage. And Anna Dalton seen leaving mansion alone. Friends who had always sought his favor now hesitated to return his calls, and business partners who once competed for his attention began quietly distancing themselves. For the first time, Robert's carefully constructed empire felt the tremors of scandal, and though he barked orders and demanded control, the cracks were widening beyond his grasp. Anna, meanwhile, chose silence. She left the Dalton estate with a single bag, retreating to the quiet protection of a family friend. To the public, her absence appeared as weakness, an expected retreat from a woman humiliated so openly. But inside, Anna was anything but broken. The humiliation she carried from that night hardened into resolve. She spoke to no journalists, issued no statements, and ignored the gossip. Robert misread her silence as surrender, believing the lack of public response meant the storm would pass. Yet in those quiet days away from him, Anna was not hiding. She was remembering, gathering, and preparing. She replayed every conversation, every secret he had entrusted to her in arrogance, every document he had shown her without realizing she was paying attention. For years, she had been a silent partner. Now her silence would become the most dangerous weapon he had ever faced. The media frenzy only accelerated. Investigative reporters dug into Robert's past, questioning whether his ruthless business tactics had always carried the same cruelty that now stood exposed. Old rivals emerged, emboldened by his vulnerability, whispering stories of deals conducted in shadows and competitors crushed without mercy. Public trust began to erode. Where once his name commanded admiration, it now carried suspicion. Robert responded with defiance, granting brief interviews in which he dismissed the incident as exaggeration, insisting his marriage was private and his success unshakable. But the more he spoke, the less convincing he became. The public had seen enough in Anna's absence to believe the worst. His allies began to wonder, if Robert could betray the woman closest to him, what loyalty could he ever show to them? The empire he believed untouchable was beginning to crumble, one broken bond at a time. Behind closed doors, Anna's planning deepened. She began compiling records she had quietly kept over the years. Contracts signed in haste, questionable financial transfers, notes of meetings where Robert bragged too freely about cutting corners or bending laws. To the world, she appeared a wounded woman fading into obscurity. In reality, she was assembling a case that would devastate him far more effectively than a public outcry ever could. Robert had always underestimated her intellect, dismissing her insights as irrelevant, her silence as weakness. He did not know that Anna had been watching, listening, and remembering. Her revenge would not come in the form of angry words shouted in the heat of a moment. It would come methodically, relentlessly, until the very foundation of Robert Dalton's empire collapsed under the weight of truth he could no longer suppress. And so the questions began to grow louder, not only from the public but from within Robert's own circle. What was Anna preparing? Did Robert truly believe he had silenced her forever? Or had he, in his arrogance, unleashed the one person capable of dismantling everything he had built? For years, Robert Dalton had believed he alone was the architect of his success, that Anna existed only as a silent ornament to complete the illusion of perfection. What he failed to realize was that Anna had always been more than the woman at his side. She had been his quiet partner, his confidant, and in truth, the architect of much of his empire. Every time she studied his plans, corrected an oversight, or introduced a subtle idea that later became a signature of his projects, she was shaping the very foundation he stood on. Robert, in his arrogance, ignored the depth of her involvement, dismissing her contributions as trivial. But Anna had never forgotten. She had watched, learned, and stored away the details he carelessly revealed. And now, when her silence appeared to everyone as retreat, she was watching still, waiting and calculating each precise step of her response. Robert had grown reckless in his confidence. He had left trails of documents, contracts, and whispered confessions that Anna carried in her memory like hidden weapons. While he boasted at banquets and postured in interviews, she was gathering the fragments he had overlooked. One by one, she pieced together a portrait of corruption, inflated valuations, hidden accounts, deals struck with promises whispered in dimly lit offices. She knew the names of rivals he had threatened, the corners he had cut, and the shortcuts he had bragged about when he thought no one of consequence was listening. When the time came, Anna moved with precision. Anonymous leaks began to surface in the press, documents no journalist could ignore, exposing Robert's most questionable practices. Reporters pounced on the material, headlines screamed of scandal, and the empire Robert had spent decades constructing began to falter under the harsh glare of public scrutiny. But Anna did not stop there. She understood that revenge required more than exposure. It required alliances. Quietly, she reached out to those Robert had crossed in his rise to power, men and women who had once feared him but now sensed his vulnerability. Old rivals, discarded partners, even former employees found themselves united under a common cause: dismantling the empire of Robert Dalton. With Anna's guidance, their fragmented grievances became a coordinated assault. Testimonies were prepared, records shared, and patterns of misconduct revealed. Where once Robert had silenced opposition with intimidation and wealth, now he faced an organized resistance, one that carried the fingerprints of the very woman he had dismissed as powerless. His name, once synonymous with prestige, was now whispered with contempt in the same circles that had celebrated him. The final blow came when Anna filed legal claims, supported by the very knowledge Robert had entrusted to her during their marriage. She knew where the hidden accounts were buried, which signatures could unravel entire deals, and which contracts contained the loopholes he had believed only he understood. In the courtroom, his lawyers tried to argue, but the evidence was overwhelming. Each new revelation chipped away at his defense until the man who had stood so confidently at the center of admiration was reduced to a figure of disgrace. Reporters filled the benches, cameras flashed, and the nation watched as Robert Dalton's empire crumbled under the weight of truth. Anna, silent in the gallery, did not need to speak. The documents, the testimonies, and the undeniable facts spoke for her. Robert's once flawless reputation was shredded in public. The magazines that had once praised him now ran exposés on his deceit. The politicians who had sought his approval now avoided his calls. The partners who once competed for his attention now lined up to testify against him. And in the silence of his downfall, one fact became inescapable. The woman he had humiliated, dismissed, and discarded was the very one who had orchestrated his undoing. Robert had thought that by striking her down in front of his friends he had proven his dominance. In reality, he had unleashed a storm he could not control. Anna's revenge was not loud, not dramatic. It was methodical, precise, and devastating. She had been watching. She had been waiting. She had been calculating. And now everything Robert Dalton had built was reduced to rubble. Robert Dalton's empire collapsed with a speed that startled even his harshest critics. Contracts that once seemed ironclad evaporated as partners withdrew their support, citing the scandals that now surrounded his name. Friends who had enjoyed his banquets and leaned on his influence no longer answered his calls. His wealth, which had once flowed as a symbol of invincibility, was tied up in lawsuits, frozen in accounts, or swallowed by legal battles. The man who once walked into rooms commanding admiration now entered them only to be met with silence, whispers, or outright avoidance. He had believed his power to be unshakable, that money and charm could silence any storm. But as each layer of his empire fell away, Robert was confronted with the truth he had spent his life denying. He had built everything on fragile foundations, and in the end, it was Anna who had set the final collapse in motion. Anna Dalton, once the quiet shadow at Robert's side, began to rebuild a life of her own. She started small, drawing on the skills she had set aside years earlier, designing modest homes for families who could never have dreamed of affording Robert's towers. Her name, once hidden behind his, began to carry weight of its own. Investors respected her vision, clients admired her resilience, and communities embraced her as a figure of strength. In interviews, she rarely spoke of Robert directly, but those who listened carefully understood the depth of her story. She had endured humiliation and violence, but she had transformed that pain into a new kind of power, the power of independence, of dignity, and of creating something lasting that was truly hers. While Robert drowned in the ruins of arrogance, Anna rose steadily, her confidence no longer silenced, but magnified by the very struggle meant to break her. The final confrontation between them was not staged in a courtroom or splashed across headlines, but in a quiet encounter that revealed the gulf between who they had been and who they had become. Robert, gaunt and weary, caught sight of Anna as she stepped out of a newly completed project, surrounded by young architects who looked to her with admiration. For a moment, their eyes met. Robert's gaze carried the hollow weight of defeat, the recognition that he was watching the woman he had once dismissed as powerless now standing tall, respected, and unbroken. Anna did not gloat, did not speak. She simply met his stare with calm strength before walking past him, her step steady, her future hers alone to command. In that silence, Robert understood what words could not capture. The woman he had tried to destroy was the same woman who had destroyed him, not with fury, but with unshakable resolve. And so the story of Robert and Anna Dalton closed not with reconciliation, but with a truth that could not be ignored. Robert thought his power made him untouchable, that his wealth and influence placed him above consequence. But in the end, it was Anna, the woman he humiliated, the wife he underestimated, the partner he sought to silence, who proved stronger than all his wealth combined. His empire lay in ruins, his name reduced to scandal, while hers carried forward with quiet dignity. Robert faded into the shadows of his own downfall, a cautionary figure of arrogance undone. Anna walked confidently into the future, not as a victim defined by pain, but as a survivor and builder whose strength had turned betrayal into justice. The story of Robert and Anna Dalton is not just one of betrayal and revenge. It is a reminder of how fragile power can be when it is built on arrogance and cruelty. Robert believed his wealth and reputation made him untouchable, yet in the end, those very things became his downfall. Anna, the woman he tried to silence, showed that strength can grow in silence and that justice sometimes comes not with fury, but with patience and resolve. Their tale forces us to confront difficult questions. When betrayal is so deep, is revenge a form of justice? Or does it risk becoming something darker? Can redemption exist for a man who once believed himself above consequence? Or is the collapse of his empire the only resolution such arrogance deserves? These questions linger, demanding reflection long after the headlines fade. What do you think? Was Anna's revenge justice, or did it go too far? Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. The story of Robert and Anna Dalton may have ended in ruin and resilience, but there are countless others that echo with the same themes of betrayal, revelation, and justice. And if you thought this story was shocking, wait until you hear about the woman who uncovered her husband's double life at his own funeral.